Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third annual Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I'm Jamie Mochick with the Nicolay Federated Library System in Green Bay, and on behalf of myself and the other 14 systems who help sponsor this conference, we are very glad you are here. We have 5 sessions today. We had one at 9 o'clock. This is our 10:30 session. We also have 5 tomorrow, and they are on a variety of topics that we think you will find very valuable. Or we hope you do anyway. Our next presenter is Renee Grassi of the Glen Ellen Public Library in Illinois. And Renee was highly recommended as a presenter by our own Marge Lock Waters in La Crosse and other children's folks that I spoke to around the country. And this is a topic that I get asked about quite a bit, and I always don't have the best answers to provide. So I'm really glad Renee is here to provide us with more insight on creating these welcoming environments. So, Renee, whenever you are ready.
Jamie, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here participating in this, so thank you to the Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference for inviting me. And I want to thank all of you, those of you listening today. Your presence at this webinar really means that you are advocating for children with special needs. And so thank you. Today we are going to talk about, we're going to take a broad approach to serving children with special needs. So I hope that you'll take away some ideas about service, about collections, about programs that you can implement and include right away in your communities. Certainly, as our communities diversify, we really must become sensitive to the needs of all individuals and really adopt a more flexible, inclusive approach to services. So it really doesn't matter if you serve small or large communities, urban or rural. All of us in libraries serve children with special needs. So really, thank you for being here today. All right. Sorry, guys. So a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. We'll talk about the why. Why are we here? Why is it so important to be serving children inclusively in our library communities? And then we're going to talk about building a foundation. Where do you begin before you develop new programs? We'll talk about collections. We'll talk about customer service tips, and I'll share with you some sample programming ideas, examples that I've done at the variety of libraries that I've worked at, and we'll talk about making accommodations with through your existing programs. So for those of you that are already offering library programs, I'll give you some tips and strategies for making those inherently more inclusive. We'll also talk about some other service ideas, and I'll share with you some print and online resources as well. However, all of the attendees attending today will have access to several handouts which I've provided the webinar conference, so I'll refer to those throughout the presentation, and you'll be able to download them after the webinar. Okay. So for me, I always like to start with the why. Why serve the underserved? I think the numbers here are significant, so I wanted to go a little bit over some of the numbers. 1 in every 20 children have a disability, and 1 in every 68 are identified with autism. And I'm referring to the 2010 U.S. Census data, the Pew and Internet American Life Project, as well as the Autism Society with some of these statistics. Another staggering statistic, only 61% of children with disabilities graduate high school. So then I think, how can the library play a role in serving these families to help their children succeed in life? And for me, I think about a quote. At its core, inclusion is really about the spirit, not the space. And I think this is really important. It relates certainly to libraries because the spirit of all libraries, all public libraries, is that we welcome all people, all cultures, all ages, all abilities. So certainly that's important. This is a list of some of the goals for establishing a new program, service, technology, or even a volunteer group at your library. Maybe you're thinking about advocating for a new position, creating a new position that would work specifically on serving children or members or patrons with special needs. These are some goals that you can put together. And really, I think one of the main goals is to build community, certainly to support a traditionally underserved group of individuals in our community and to provide inclusion for those that might feel isolated in other areas of the community. But really, libraries are institutions for all, and that doesn't necessarily mean, though, that all groups of people feel welcome right away. So sometimes we have to take a step back in libraries and think about what could we do differently? What programs could we create? What services can we tweak? What can we do to really make everybody feel welcome? So this type of outreach is really crucial for being inclusive. A couple of other things I wanted to talk about these goals. Initially, when I got started at the Deerfield Public Library several years ago, creating a program called Sensory Storytime, we applied for an early childhood literacy grant through the Target Foundation. And these were some of the goals that we established in writing that grant. So if you are trying to make a case at your library for something, put together some of these goals to really advocate for that. So this is where we talk about laying that foundation. What are certain critical pieces that really should be in place before you even step out of the building to do outreach or before you develop a new program and put it in your newsletter? I always like to start with training. And I have to say, unfortunately, in libraries, this is really an area that isn't covered in library school. We don't learn about how to serve people inclusively in library school. I do hope that changes very soon, one day. But at this point, I think it's really important for all levels of all staff to be on the same page when it comes to inclusive library services. When I was at the Deerfield Public Library, this is a picture of one of the training days that we had at an all-staff day, and we brought in a local organization to talk about disability awareness and inclusive customer service tips. In fact, now that I'm at the Glen Ellen Public Library, we have an upcoming staff day in April, and we are also bringing this group here to this library. That way it gives everybody at the library, from your shelvers all the way to the director, some really great strategies and tools for your toolbox about serving people inclusively. And certainly this is a transferable skill. This will take you anywhere, even outside of libraries. If you don't have an organization in your community that does disability awareness training, maybe consider reach out to your local special education district for recommendations. You could even observe your local special education classes, learn about communication strategies from watching teachers interact with their students one-on-one. That really helped me when I was getting started. And also, these teachers will help you learn about other learning opportunities that might be available online for you and your colleagues. So certainly training is a great place to start. Another place that I like to start before I develop any programs or outreach is a community assessment. And I think it's really important to assess the need of your community, because all of our communities are different. Even if you're in a rural or more urban setting, you may have a larger community or a smaller community. Each one of our communities might be different and might be interested in different types of programs or outreach. So there's a variety of ways you could do this assessment. But first you want to think about what kind of information do you want to gather. And one of the handouts that you will have access to is a list of questions that's available from a survey that we did in a partnership with our local special education district at the Deerfield Public Library. We had a partnership, and we reached out to the local special ed teachers and district, and they were able to send out a questionnaire emailed to the entire community. It went out to 10 other library communities in the district, and it was a wonderful way for us to receive feedback about different questions. So be sure to look at that handout. It has a list of all of the questions that we included, but one of the questions that we really wanted to target was, does our community want special programs, maybe separate targeted programs just for kids with special needs, or do they want something a little bit more inclusive? There's a variety of information you can gather from doing a community needs assessment. But how might you distribute it? And that's another thing you want to think about. What are some barriers to your library that you might not necessarily consider right away? Just visiting the library might be difficult for families with children with special needs. So consider email, consider having a survey online, distributing it in a variety of formats. Certainly paper copies are great, but that really only targets the people that are already coming into your libraries. And if you're trying to serve a new group of underserved members and patrons, you really want to try and get people that haven't been into your library before. And you want to ask, why maybe haven't you visited our library? So that I think is really important information to gather. Consider incentives. Who doesn't like the chance to win a raffle or a gift card? Maybe even removing some of your fines. That could be an incentive for filling out one of these surveys. And what type of things can this inform at your library? Well, certainly it can inform the development of new programs. It can also inform the development or cultivation of a new specific collection at your library. Maybe you have a large significant part of your population that would be interested in a Braille collection in the children's department. So that would help inform that development. It could also tell you that maybe perhaps training is the most important thing. Maybe some of your staff members at your library are not the most inclusive or not giving the best customer service possible. So it's really interesting to reach out to the community and find out what you could potentially learn. And a community needs assessment would be able to do that for you. I think another crucial step, again, to laying the foundation is identifying partners. And I have to say, I wouldn't have been able to be successful with any of the types of programs that I've developed at some of the libraries I've been at without the partnership of local organizations. And I think partners can really help you in a variety of ways. Certainly local organizations can help you with promotion. They can help you with training, as I mentioned, about JJ's List and the disability awareness training. They could help you even with your programs, and I'll talk a little bit about it later, how at the Deerfield Public Library and at the Glencoe Public Library, I reached out to two different groups of people, and they helped me lead these programs. So what kind of partners, who do you reach out to? Perhaps you could look into reaching out to your local park district, hospitals and health centers, certainly organizations that have access to these groups of people already that might be able to help you promote your new programs. Museums, special education professionals, even local or national disability organizations. For example, there could be a local chapter of the Autism Society in your area, and they might be able to connect you with some really great resources as well. But don't necessarily think just about the organizations that are in place. Think maybe a little bit more grassroots. I have a friend who actually recommends using meetup.com as a great way to look into what local support groups are in the area. So maybe there's a group of parents with children with special needs that meet on a regular basis, and using keywords like disability or autism or special needs on a site like meetup.com would be able to help you find these groups. And then once you do find these groups, you'd be able to reach out to them, and perhaps they'd let you come and talk to their group and talk about the library, and even maybe have them fill out some of your questionnaires to talk about how the library can improve your services. But I always like to think that libraries, fellow librarians, are even sometimes your greatest partners. If you're in an area where there are a lot of libraries concentrated in one area as opposed to a larger system where they're spread out, maybe you might want to consider not duplicating your efforts. Maybe not every single library in your system needs its own sensory story time. So if your patrons could be reciprocal borrowers and maybe they can attend other programs at other libraries, you might want to get together with your local librarians and talk about, well, what's the best way for us to serve this population in this larger community? And maybe people have different strengths and focuses, and different libraries can serve the needs in different ways. So there's a variety of ways that you can identify your partners. How might you do this? You could certainly talk to your patrons. I think that's the best way to get the best feedback and talk about what organizations are in the community. Go to resource fairs. Maybe there's an informational fair, or your local special education district is having a resource fair. Bring yourself to the table and ask if you can have a table representing your library, and share flyers, and also just be there to have those conversations. You could also sign up for newsletters, join interagency groups, and just ask your colleagues. And then certainly go online to see what is in your area that would be able to, what organizations that would be able to help you out. I think that this is an important slide. I don't think, though, that you necessarily need to find funding for every new program or service. Certainly the programs, some of the programs that I've done did not cost anything at all. But if you do have a great idea and you are trying to acquire some funding, trying to get a new service off the ground, consider applying to some grants. And I do want to make a shout out really quickly to the Target Foundation, which again is a foundation that funded a really small grant, about $2,000, for me to begin sensory storytime at the Deerfield Public Library. But also the ALSC, which is a division of ALA, sponsors the Light the Way grant. And while the grant period just closed and we're about to announce the winner in February, this is an annual grant. It provides $3,000 for developing outreach to underserved populations, birth through age 13. And we do it every year, and we received a lot of great applications this year, and so definitely check back for next year if you have a really great idea. But there are some other organizations nationally and maybe even locally in the Wisconsin area that might be able to help you out with funding. Okay. So once you have laid the groundwork, I really think it's important to consider your collections. You know, so many people ask me about sensory storytime specifically. They talk to me about programming, but I think that sometimes collections can be overlooked. I really think it's important to consider your collections as both mirrors and windows to the world. Kids with disabilities should see themselves in books that they read, and others without disabilities can be exposed to diversity through the books and the reading experiences that they have. So I really think it's important for us to consider our collection. You know, we need to look at what types of books we're offering. Are we offering books that represent a diverse group that is in our community? Maybe we want to look into the Schneider Family Book Award, which is an annual book award given to books awarding the disability experience. So for those of you that are waiting for next week's Caldecott and Newberry announcements, while you're watching that same webcast, you'll notice the Schneider Family Book Award. That's another award that doesn't get as much hype, I think, but is also very important in terms of highlighting books that really demonstrate excellent disability experience. But also you want to consider offering different formats that can be accessed by your diverse learners and abilities in your community. Do you offer books that are, do you have downloadable books? Do you have audio books? Do you have a parenting collection that is specifically targeting topics for special needs parents? Do you have a variety of formats, as I mentioned, maybe Braille books, and seedlings.org is a great resource for purchasing more. I did want to highlight high-low books, and for those of you that aren't familiar with that term, high-low book is a book that is written at the interest level of someone who is older, but at the reading level of someone who is who has a low reading level. And what I like about high-low books is that they're inclusive, not only just for children with special needs, but also your children with reading disabilities. And I think that there are some really great publishers that are out there that provide access to reading material that are written in this high-low fashion. highnoonbooks.com is just one of them. And then thinking about what types of books you have for kids without special needs, but that promote inclusion. There's a variety of things that your collections can do to be inclusive as well. I do want to touch a little bit about customer service tips. It's unfortunate that we don't learn this in library school, but at the same time, though, some of these things are not always intuitive. We have new staff members coming into the library on a regular basis that are on our front lines, and we really want to make sure that we provide them with the tools and strategies that they need to provide excellent customer service at all times. And I think that inclusive customer service is something that really all levels of library staff can strive for. So the first one that I wanted to talk about was using person-first language. And one of the handouts that you'll be provided and be able to download is a handout that I've given to many a training group. A variety, I make copies as often as I can and pass them out in droves. But it's an example of people-first language. And what I think is really important about people-first language is that inherently it puts the person first. It puts the medical diagnosis second. So, for example, you may have heard someone say that autistic boy, or someone who is handicapped, or he's mentally retarded. These are phrases that I think about it beyond PC, beyond political correctness. I really think about the fact that we want to recognize the humanity of another person, and we really want to put that person first. We want to get to know their names, but certainly we want to put the disability second. So, for example, instead of saying the disabled person, you could say the person with a disability. So there's a variety of examples on this handout that is accessible for you, and feel free to make copies, download it as much as you want, and pass it out to everybody you know. I think it's a great conversation starter, and I do think that it's important for us to take a step back and reflect about the language that we use. You know, we never know who is at the desk, who is listening to the types of language that we use, and disability could affect families in a variety of ways. And just because you don't see that a person has a disability, there are certainly invisible disabilities, and maybe disability affects an aunt or a cousin or their child. So I think it's important to really take a look at the language that we use. Certainly we want to adjust our mindset, and one of the things that I say is that a sensory story time or a program for children with disabilities may not look like a typical program that you've developed for kids without disabilities. And that's okay. You know, one of the things I talk about is sensory story time is not necessarily this perfect vision of a half circle of children sitting, you know, very quietly, hands in their laps, crisscross applesauce. I don't even know if that really happens in the real world of children's story times anyway, but certainly children experience their world in different ways, and kids with disabilities as well are included in that. So I think it's really important for us to say it's okay, and maybe focus not so much on correcting the behavior, but focusing on accommodations we can make and thinking about how we can be supportive and welcoming in the development of our programs. And I'll be able to talk about that a little later with more specific, concrete examples. Being patient, being flexible, certainly these are universal principles for any good customer service strategy, but especially with working with people with disabilities. Someone who may have a speech delay, it may take a little bit longer for them to process the language or process and communicate to you what it is exactly that they're trying to ask you. Be flexible. Maybe a book during a story time is just not quite working well, and so sometimes I've even stopped mid-book and put it down and said, this book isn't working. Let's go on to the next activity. So I think flexibility is very key. Certainly, asking simple questions and using simple language is always a really good practice. I always like to focus my language, and this is something that I've picked up from observing special education classrooms. I'd like to focus my language, and I'm a talker, and that's something that I've had to work on and I've struggled with adapting myself, but sometimes it's important for us to adapt our own style so that we're thinking about how the kids are receiving the information. And so asking simple questions, offering simple choices, and I'll talk about making some other accommodations later on. But always encourage comments and suggestions. I think it's important when we're trying to serve people with disabilities that we should acknowledge we may have not always been inclusive at our library. We are aware that we need to improve, and we really value your feedback. You know, because these parents of kids with disabilities are cheerleaders for their kids, they're champions for their kids, and they're advocates. And really, if we're trying to develop programs that work best for them, we really do want to be open and encourage comments and suggestions at every level, even in the planning stages, during the program, and afterwards to hear how they're experiencing the library and what else we can do to better their experience. So now I'm going to go into talking a little bit about programming. And from the people that I've talked to and the presentations I've made, I think it's important before we talk about the specific programs to talk about the methodology behind the programming. It's important to think about the different types of programs that you can offer. And for the purposes of this presentation, I'm defining targeted programs as programs that are specifically designed and marketed for children with special needs. Whereas inclusion programs, and I apologize, there's an error in my PowerPoint there, but it says benefits of inclusion and drawbacks to inclusion programs. Inclusive programs are really designed universally from the get-go. They're already offered to everyone, and they're accessible, and the activities have all abilities in mind. So let's talk a little bit about targeted programming. I think there are a variety of benefits to targeted programming. Having done Sensory Storytime at the Deerfield Public Library, it was a program that was specifically designed and catered to children with disabilities. So in that sense, a benefit is that the format and content really is designed with their specific unique needs in mind. Another benefit is that parents really do feel comfortable with other families who understand their unique experience. If you have targeted programs that welcome the entire family and families with other children with disabilities are there, they can relate and they can connect to other families and not necessarily worry about judgment from families that maybe don't understand their experience fully. So I do think that that's a very good benefit to targeted programming. However, drawbacks for targeted programming, I sometimes think the focus sometimes is too much on the difference. If you have a program that's just designed for children with special needs, whereas the content might be really great for them and designed with their unique needs in mind, children with disabilities are denied opportunities from being able to learn from their typically developing peers. I think when we don't have inclusive programs, we're denying our families the opportunity to make friends with one another, to really see past the differences. And, sometimes families with children with special needs can feel isolated in the larger communities. And so if we have separate programs, that really continues potentially their feeling of that isolation. So on the other hand, with regards to inclusion, I think there are a variety of benefits. At the Glencoe Public Library, I decided to augment Sensory Storytime to make it a little bit more inclusive. I'll talk about how I did that a little bit later. But one of the benefits to inclusion programs is that at its heart, inclusion really is a celebration of differences. And I think that that's exactly what the spirit of libraries is all about. It's the belief that diverse communities are richer and more productive when you have all abilities in mind. And really, inclusive programs give you an opportunity to celebrate diversity and allow children to be exposed to differences early on when they're young. And that's a really great thing. It promotes respect. It promotes friendship. But certainly there could be drawbacks to inclusion programs as well. Some people in the academic world, in the special education world, think that philosophically inclusion sometimes focuses too much on the socialization aspect and less on the academic. So, for example, kids with unique needs may not always have their unique needs met in an inclusive program. And sometimes in an inclusive program, families without children with disabilities may not necessarily be informed about why this program is inclusive or the best way to be inclusive in communicating with other children and other families. So there might be that judgment factor there. And that's where I think the library has an opportunity to model inclusion and provide a piece of an education piece, if you will, to families without children with disabilities, to talk about how Johnny may do things a little differently. He might be experiencing the world in a different way. And this is how Johnny expresses his frustration, for example. So I think that there is a learning opportunity there if you have programs, if you have inclusive programs. So really, I always see programming as a spectrum. This is certainly not an exhaustive list by any means. I know, and I'm always inspired by what other libraries are doing, and certainly in the chat feature, if there's a program that you happen to do, I would love to hear about it. I'm always inspired by what other libraries will be able to accomplish to serve children with special needs. However, on the left side, you'll see is more of the inclusive route. There's a variety of programs that you can do and probably are already doing, and just with a slightly bit of tweaking in your marketing could promote it in a more inclusive way, whether it's a family film program or a gaming program, cooking or exercise programs, even life skills. As people with disabilities get older, they need help with resume building and applying for a job, just like everybody else. And so that's a really important skill to be able to learn at the library. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, that's where I see a lot more of the targeted programs, programs that are, again, developed specifically, the content and the format developed specifically with children with special needs in mind. For example, Sensory Storytime, Storytime for the Blind. We have a local organization here, Philip J. Rock in Glen Ellen, who it's actually a transitional school, residential school where kids who are both deaf and blind attend, and we're looking to do some more outreach to them. Maybe you have programs that utilize trained therapy dogs, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Even sensory-friendly performances, sign language interpreters, special education class visits, even thinking about opening the library before hours just to families with children with special needs. Sometimes taking away the distraction of all of the people in the library could really help families enjoy the library better. And I know the Northbrook Public Library has done that several times, and they've always been very successful. Certainly it's a little bit more manpower in terms of library staffing, but I think the outcomes could really be wonderful in terms of promoting the library to this underserved group of patrons. So first, I'm going to talk about Sensory Storytime. And my experience with Sensory Storytime, really it's Sensory Storytime two ways. At the Deerfield Public Library, it was one way, and then when I was at the Glencoe Public Library, I know, so many Glens, right, here in Illinois. When I was at the Glencoe Public Library, it was slightly different, slightly augmented. But first, I'll talk to you a little bit about Sensory Storytime as it was at the Deerfield Public Library. As I mentioned, we applied for initial funding from the Target's Early Childhood Reading Grant, and we received $2,000. And what this money paid for was a variety of things, actually. We were recommended by our local special education group and district to purchase new seating, assistive seating that would help define the area of a child's seat, but also provide a little bit more sensory input. So you can see Henry right here is sitting in his blue chair. It's a backjack chair. So it provides a little bit more sensory input with a squishy bottom part of the seat, but it also provides a specific space for him to be in when he's at the story time. It also provides a little bit more support. You can see the back of the chair. So for those kids that cannot sit on their own, that need a little bit more help, a backjack chair is a great piece to use in story time. This program was an hour-long, 30 minutes of storytime activities and then 30 minutes of structured play. And one of the things that I learned from observing my local special education district was that the special ed classroom was really set up in stations. And I thought, well, this is real interesting. Maybe storytime could be, the format of storytime could mimic the classroom in that way. Certainly it would be familiar to the students. There'd be a lot of visual supports, which I'll talk about shortly, and the kids would rotate around the room just as they do in special ed classes between the different activities. So again, I really would recommend going to your local special education classrooms and observing to see what you could pick up and what strategies might work for your programs at your library. This was for kids chronologically ages 4 to 8 with their parents and caregivers, and we called it Sensory Storytime, Stories and Emergent Literacy Activities for Children with Special Needs. So you can see just in the title of the program, we decided to opt for a more targeted approach. And since this program was launched in 2010, I've since left Deerfield, obviously, but a friend of mine, a colleague, Paula, who's still at that library, has continued working with children with special needs. And she has said that she's received some feedback from the members in that area, saying that they really didn't want the marketing of the program to be separate. They wanted the title to be inclusive, but they didn't want it to call out their children with special needs. They didn't want the program itself to be highlighted in a special box in the newsletter. And I thought that was really interesting. So they've decided to go the more inclusive route and calling it something slightly different. But again, I think that that's a great reminder about, you know, how important feedback is from your community about marketing. Because sometimes if you're promoting a program and you put it in your newsletter, they could be turned off. Families with children with special needs could be turned off right at the onset, seeing that program marketed in a particular way if it happens to turn them off. But one of the things that I thought Sensory Storytime was, one of the reasons Sensory Storytime is different from other story times is that the activities involved really are activities that mimic and reflect the type of therapeutic activities that physicians and therapists do with children with special needs in therapies. So, for example, there was a lot of focus on sensory skill building. You'll see here the program outline. We rotated back and forth between books and songs and movement activities. We always had the same structure, so it was predictable, and the kids could get to know it and feel more confident transitioning throughout, you know, as they attended each week. And we always finished with the same book, Wave Goodbye by Rob Reed. For those of you that know this book, it's great. There's a lot of movement activities or movement opportunities in it, and it was just a great way to end the session. You'll see in the bottom picture there, I have some visual supports. There are some large pictures at the front of the room where kids are facing. On the right side, you'll see 3 images, and that's actually images of the 3 rules. And these are rules that I picked up from my local special ed classroom teachers. And these are rules that the kids were already familiar with: quiet hands, quiet mouth, quiet feet. And while not every child has a quiet mouth or can even have the mobility to keep their hands and feet quiet, it offered the chance for parents and staff to certainly reinforce behavior as they needed to. So this program was capped at 10 children, and from the onset of us offering it, we had completely full programs with wait lists. It was really, really a wonderful program. And as you can see here are some more pictures of the program. What I think really made this program successful was the fact that we had help from volunteer special ed teachers in the community, as well as trained teen volunteers as well. We did a disability awareness training for our teen volunteers, and then they were able to come into the Storytime and help out and participate in the activities. And you could see the friendships grow, you could see the bonds grow, which was really wonderful to see. And what else we saw was that in terms of program outcomes, the kids were more confident in their transitions, they increased in their attentiveness and attendance to stories, they communicated more, and they were able to engage in parallel play, which is something that they often focus on in schools. So it was really a wonderful program. And the reason it was different from Sensory Storytime at the Glencoe Public Library was that Deerfield Public Library's program was staff-run. However, when I got the job at Glencoe Public Library, I realized staffing limitations, and there were some other resource limitations. I was the only full-time staff member at that time, so I wasn't able to lead Sensory Storytime as I was at the Deerfield Public Library. So I made this wonderful partnership with a local organization called the National Wacko Tech Center, and they're actually experienced with leading family play groups, programs that are focused on accessible play, and we developed a Sensory Storytime. I informed the selection of the books that they would read. We selected themes together, themes that were relatable, like food, transportation, music, animals, and they brought in all of the activities and the accessible toys and we provided them with a small honorarium sponsored by our friends of the library, our very generous friends of the library at the Glencoe Public Library. And so they were able to bring everything in, and then they took it away. And at the Glencoe Public Library, which was a very, very small library, very limited in space, that was really key. So, of course, sensory storytime may look different at every single library in your area, and that's okay. It really is going to depend on your resources, your space, and your community. So we were able to provide activities that really support brain development, sensory play, and we focus them, again, on themes. I think a good tip here is emailing your families. Have a personal relationship with your families that come on a regular basis to your special needs programming. Take their email and then send them email reminders as a new program is coming up. Sometimes, with the email overload that we can always get, it's always good to remind our families that this great opportunity is coming up at the library. And what I really enjoyed here, you can see a picture of one of the Lacotech staff helping a young child with putting up the letters, putting up the little pieces of food from Eating the Alphabet, Lois Ellert's matching story. They matched the pictures of the food with the letter up on the board. But what I really loved to see was the interaction here between parents and children, and you can see that in the bottom picture below. We were able to extend the learning by inviting parents into the program, so that really was a wonderful thing to see. I'm going to talk a little bit about Read to Rover. Read to Rover is another partnership program that I did at the Deerfield Public Library, and perhaps you've done therapy dog programs at your library. The wonderful thing about therapy dogs is that they provide emotional support to kids that need it the most. I've heard of therapy dogs going to college campuses and helping kids through finals week, which is a very stressful, anxiety-producing time. So the idea of bringing therapy dogs into the library and developing a program for kids, with these dogs and supporting the needs of children with special needs was organization. And we were really happy to hear that they were interested. They actually had experience working with kids with special needs. And I think it's important, if you're looking to do a similar program like this, talking to the program leader and the organizational leader and making sure that the dogs are a right fit for your community. I really was interested in finding dogs that had a very low-key demeanor, that, dogs that maybe perhaps a wheelchair would roll over their tail. I didn't want them to be reactive. Very, just lovable, cuddly dogs. So I don't think a Border Collie would really work in this situation. So really the personality has to be the right fit. But I think what was wonderful was that it provided that emotional support to kids that needed a little bit more help visiting the library. And this was really just a 30-minute story time, dog-themed, of course. We had different activities and stations around the room for parents to engage with their kids. And we offered it for a variety of different ages. We originally had it for ages 5 to 8, and then we decided to offer it for ages 8 to 16. And that was equally successful, and I could see this being a great program for adults with developmental disabilities, for example. This was something that I had done at the Glencoe Public Library more recently, and this is actually based on AMC's model that they partnered with the Autism Society. AMC, for those of you that don't know, offers sensory-friendly films in their theaters, and this is specifically geared towards kids with autism, but it's really open for all ages and abilities for kids with disabilities. And it's a movie-going experience that's more inclusive. So, for example, the average movie-going experience, has certain social requirements. You have to be quiet. You can't get up and talk and sing during the movie. However, AMC, partnering with the Autism Society, decided to say, let's open up our movie-going experiences to families with children of all abilities, and let's give them an environment that's really inclusive. And so I decided to do something similar at the Glencoe Public Library, offering a movie program, utilizing some of the movies we already had on hand, certainly, the ones that are really popular, but also we wanted to highlight some of those that had book-based characters. The room was lighter. We offered closed captioning during the movie. We made an announcement before the movie started saying that it was a very open and welcoming environment. So this is just another program opportunity for you as well. I've talked a little bit about my relationship with the local special education district, but they were really interested in coming into the library and having a visit led by a librarian. And this is something we've just begun outreach here at the Glen Ellen Public Library. If you check out the Snails blog, I'll have a list of resources at the end, as well as the ALSC blog for sample programs and templates for these class visits. It was really an opportunity for me to develop and create programs that were engaging and brought the kids into the library, but also directly correlated with the curriculum, with what the teachers were teaching in the schools. So we've done nature story times, we've done President's Day story times. Again, it was an opportunity to really already going into the schools, and it was in many ways developed and structured in a similar way to sensory story time. And I just want to briefly highlight this wonderful, amazing program that we have at the Glen Ellen Public Library, which I actually think was already inherently inclusive, but they just didn't quite know it yet. Smart Starts is a hands-on interactive environment. It's an open program for parents to come in and spend as much time as they want with their children in the variety of stations that we have set up around the room. And each week there is a different theme. It's always held in a 4-week series, and basically the librarian is the facilitator to help engage children and parents in play activities and learning. And it's really an exploratory program with a lot of different sensory opportunities. One week there was even, it was all dedicated to exploring the 5 senses. So that in and of itself is inherently inclusive for those kids that may need a little bit more sensory input, or for those, for example, someone who is visually impaired or who is blind could still engage in the program and be able to have a very rich experience. It was drop-in, no registration required, and we continue to see a huge increase in the amount of people that attend Smart Starts. So really it's all about the marketing. I'm going to just kind of fly through here making accommodations. I just want to talk a little bit about the different types of supports that you can make available in your existing programs that would make your programs automatically a little bit more inclusive. Fidgets are small objects that children can squeeze or pull or move around as a child listens, and really it helps them to calm and self-regulate if they're feeling anxious or worried or sad or frustrated. So we always provide fidgets during story times and programs, providing opportunities for kids with all abilities to touch and feel books during the program. We have visual schedules, which we've made to mimic the order of the program as well, and that was created using software called Boardmaker. And that's available through, if you do a quick Google search, it's available for about $200, so it's a little pricey. We did purchase it with our grant money, but it was something that was used in the special ed classrooms, and so we knew we wanted to reinforce that as well in our story times. Providing sensory exploration is really key for kids who have all abilities, who may have different special needs. So, for example, for someone who is blind, who may not be able to see their world, providing sensory opportunities for them to touch, feel, and smell, and everything is a really great opportunity for them. You might have children that are sensory seeking, which means that they might want more sensory experiences. They might like something that's hard, a hard touch or a sharp touch. Or you might also have children that are sensory avoiding. Maybe even the slightest bit of a feather is too much for them to handle. So talking to your families and making sure that, that you have a variety of opportunities, activities available is a really good thing as well. Certainly providing movement opportunities is a really good way for the kids to relieve anxiety and energy, and again to self-regulate. Gets those wiggles out, and certainly make sure to accommodate all movers. I really love Jim Gill here. He has some really wonderful songs that are that you could use in a variety of ways. He actually has a background with working with children with special needs. So one of his songs that I've used a lot is my highs and lows. I like to isolate different body parts, so for those that maybe do not have a lot of movement, they'd be able to raise their arms and raise them back down again, whereas other kids could stand up and squat down. So that inherently is a little bit more inclusive. And then again, providing multiple formats. You want to make sure that you consider having extra copies for kids that want a more shared reading experience. Provide big books where the whole audience can see. Even thinking about adapting books. Dog's Colorful Day, we passed out the different colors to the audience, and kids got to bring the colors up on the board. Tactile books, adapted stories. If you have kids that have visual impairments and you have a Braille collection, bringing that story in the Braille format, that would be a great suggestion as well. And here's just a very short list, and again, it's not exhaustive by any means, of some other things that you would be able to do at your library. I do want to say that This Is My Library social story is something that I've created at the libraries that I've worked at. This Is My Library is a story written in the first person, and is something that I picked up from the local special education teachers. And social stories really are stories that help teach a new concept or a new experience to a child that has never experienced it before. So we developed a This Is My Library social story, and there is one available on the Deerfield Public Library website in Deerfield, Illinois, as well as the Glencoe Public Library website in Glencoe, Illinois. It's available and it's downloadable for parents to read through with their children before they make that first library visit, which I think is really crucial. It helps alleviate some of that anxiety about what I might see, what I might do, and they're able to read it multiple times so they can feel confident before even walking through our doors. And if you have a toy collection, consider making sure that you have accessible toys as well. There are a variety available, and these are actually through an organization or a company called Plan, P-L-A-N. They make some really wonderful, sturdy, accessible toys that I think would be great additions to any existing toy collections at your library. Here's just a couple of pictures of some books. I'm really encouraged by the amount of resources that are available these days on this topic. There's just more and more published the more that people are becoming aware and learning about what we can do in libraries to serve children with special needs. A lot of these are available through the ALA store online, but also look for a new publication. If you're interested, shoot me an email. You'll see my contact information at the end. I contributed to a publication that's coming out next month, Sensory Storytime Manual, Enhancing Stories with Sensory Experiences. And this actually incorporates 10 or more program templates from the programs that we develop with the National Lacotech Center at the Glencoe Public Library. So check that out. And then I just want to make a really quick shout out about our Snails blog. The big blue square that you see in the middle there, we in Illinois have recently launched a networking group of librarians who are interested and passionate about serving all users with disabilities more inclusively in libraries. And we write guest posts. We put together a lot of training. We meet quarterly throughout the year and provide training to librarians in the Chicagoland area. And we included on the resource handout that you're able to download after this webinar is over. And I just want to say a big thank you again for having me, but also thank you for attending. Please don't hesitate to reach out via email, online, or on Twitter if you're online there. I'd always be happy to talk a situation out with you or happy to help in any way that I can. And really, I just hope this webinar has inspired you to consider how your library can be a more welcoming and inclusive place for children with special needs. And I hope it's given you an opportunity to reflect on how we as librarians can make an impact on the lives of children and their families. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Renee. We do have a few minutes for questions, so if any of you have any, please go ahead and type those in your question box. We had a lot of conversation going on in the chat box. I know some of you who were sharing program ideas and things with me, I was posting them to the main box, so all of you could see those. And as I mentioned, all 5 of Renee's handouts that she shared with me are already posted up on our website. The Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference website. If you go under the recordings tab, that is where you will find those. Renee, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned at the beginning how this type of training is so important, and you wish you had more training, in library school. And I'm guessing the attendees listening in today are listening because they're doing this already. They want these ideas, or they feel it's important. So how do you go about explaining to your manager or your supervisor or your library director that these types of services or that these types of welcoming environments are important at your library? Because I know that can be a challenge.
Absolutely. That's such a great question. I think it's really important to advocate for yourself. We in libraries are constantly challenged to learn and be relevant in today's communities, and this is another aspect of the profession that just requires constant learning and exploration. We at the Glen Ellen Public Library just finished our strategic plan, and we wanted to incorporate serving underserved groups in the Glen Ellen area in our strategic plan. And I think that once you incorporate from the top down, but I do think from the bottom up, I think you can lead from any position. When I was at the Deerfield Public Library, the training, the picture from the training that you saw, I was not a lowly librarian by any means, but a librarian, and I recommended that we do this training, and I was asked to organize it, and then that's what happened. And so then beyond that, job descriptions were updated, more training was provided. So I think it's really important, even just starting with a conversation with your manager and explaining how I don't like to use the word trendy because a trend implies that it's going to go out of style one time soon. But we have always served members and patrons with special needs, and we will always serve members with special needs. That's nothing that's going to go away. Our communities are just going to continue to diversify with the amount of autism diagnoses, for example, with funding, going away for different organizations, statewide funding. So I think libraries can really be leaders in that sense. So I think that could be an angle as well. And comparing, your library with what other libraries are doing in the area is another way to be able to advocate what your library should be doing.
Great. A comment just came in from Lucy, and I wanted to mention this. She said, I sit in a wheelchair and find it much easier to talk with children than adults. Why? Children are my height. I would suggest that standing adults sit on a nearby chair, if possible, when carrying on a lengthy conversation with an individual in a wheelchair. That is a great tip. Thank you so much. Renee, I'm going to ask this of all of our presenters today, and the question is, what do you find most exciting about working in libraries right now? Not necessarily specifically in what you do, but just in general.
Well, I think it's such a dynamic profession, and I think the diversity of what we can do, what we're challenged to do, is really what captivates me. I haven't been a librarian all that too long. I graduated from library school at Dominican in 2009, but what intrigued me was the fact that there's so many different things that you could do in this profession. Even just as a youth librarian, the diversity of your day goes from ordering picture books to doing outreach to leading a sensory story time to working at the desk to doing technology programs. I think that that's really exciting, and as the landscape of libraries changes, our profession is going to change, and I'm right there with you guys. So I'm excited to see what it's going to entail, how it's going to continue changing.
Great. Just a reminder that the slides for Renee and the recording will be made available on the website as well. Our next session is at 1 p.m. Leah will be talking about tablet slinging librarians, using tablets to improve customer service. So thank you again, Renee, for the great presentation. Thank you all for listening in. I hope to see you for another one of our sessions either today or tomorrow. If not, thank you for participating. Goodbye.
Thank you.